Where did all the AI knitting patterns go? Where are they now? Because 2 years ago, it was all anybody was talking about, and the knitting community has become more anti-AI than ever. And yet discourse around AI-generated knitting patterns has gone silent. That's weird, right? Back in 2018, a research scientist named Janelle Shane got together with a group of knitters from Ravelry to train a neural network that they were calling SkyKnit, which is a pun on Skynet from the Terminator movies. And they input hundreds of knitting patterns into this neural network and then asked it to generate some knitting patterns. And the results were kind of crazy, as you can imagine. Even though the outputs from SkyKnit looked like a knitting pattern should, it had the right shorthand, knit to, purl to, like the right organization of things. If you actually tried to knit one of these patterns, the things that came out were absolutely ridiculous. Physics didn't apply to the objects that were being designed by SkyKnit. But despite the fact that these patterns were irrevocably broken, this group of knitters decided to try and knit them anyway, and the output became just totally silly. Some of the participants referred to this as Operation Hilarious Knitting Disaster. One participant said, "Be careful about knitting this one. I think it creates an infinite loop that consumes all of the yarn on Earth." And for a while, this was the whole story when it came to AI-generated knitting patterns. They were a mess. When ChatGPT was first released, people would prompt it to create a amigurumi pattern, and they would crochet the results and show just how cursed it was. There were even books that were published based on this concept. Even as AI started to frighten and concern more and more people, at least we could find solace in the fact that AI can't take over the world if it can't even make a knitting pattern. But that was all a few years ago. It's almost weird to think about a time where knitters thought AI-generated patterns were funny, because things are so different today. Knitters are so angry about AI that the knitting community will come for whoever's using AI publicly in a very intense way. Now, I share a lot of that anger, and I've been carefully following this anti-AI discourse, and I've noticed kind of a strange pattern. As prevalent as this AI-generated knitting pattern discourse was just a couple of years ago, I haven't noticed people talking about AI-generated patterns in a while. No one's joking about them. People aren't really expressing concern about them. The discourse just kind of went quiet. So I decided to try and find out what happened. I started my search for AI-generated knitting patterns in the place where AI slop lives these days, which is Etsy, sadly enough. You may have seen this video or this carousel I posted a couple of months ago on how to identify AI-generated knitting patterns. And I talked about red flags in these listings I did find on Etsy, like AI-generated images, descriptions that seem very AI-y, and that don't match the images in the listing. If you click on the listing person, they don't lead anywhere. There's no Instagram, there's no Ravelry profile, it's just kind of like a dead end, and often their avatar, their picture on Etsy is AI generated as well. Because these listings have so many AI red flags, I just felt like pretty confident that the pattern itself must be AI generated too. So after I posted these, I went ahead and downloaded the pattern attached to this Etsy listing because I was pretty curious. What does an AI-generated knitting pattern look like today? I know what it looked like a couple years ago. It was absolute slop, but how does it look today? And to be honest, my motivations weren't so pure. I was ready for a takedown. I wanted to take this PDF and break it down line by line, show just how messy and sloppy this pattern is. That is not what I found. This PDF looked pretty good. And I was perplexed. Now, for a time, I used to edit craft and knitting and crochet books. It was my job to make sure that everything looked consistent, that instructions complied with the conventions we expect, everything in the right order and the right place, the materials right up top, maybe a little blurb. As I was looking at this pattern, there was nothing that stood out on the page to me that made me think, this is slop. The pattern itself was logically written, it was clear. It looked a lot like other hat patterns like it that I had knit myself. In fact, if this exact PDF was listed on Ravelry with real images and the name of a designer I knew and trusted, I do not think I would have blinked. So at this point, I'm a little bit flummoxed. That messes up what I'm trying to do here a little bit. So I started at this point to reframe my thinking. Maybe the story isn't about AI slop anymore. Maybe the story is the inverse. AI knitting patterns have gotten really good, scary good. And maybe it's a warning that we can't really identify what they look like anymore because they're so polished. But I had just one more pickle, which is that I couldn't confirm for sure that this pattern was AI generated. I can't, in good faith, call this an AI generated knitting pattern without knowing for sure. So at this point, I reached out to the person listing this pattern. I message her and say, hey, I noticed that you used AI in some elements of this listing. It seems that the images and the description are AI generated. I was curious as to whether you used AI to generate this knitting pattern or to assist you in its design. And she got back to me pretty quickly and said she uses AI for some administrative tasks like the image generation and the description, and she uses AI for like proofreading and number checking, but she adamantly denied using AI to generate this knitting pattern. This complicates things. So I wrote back and asked her if she could clarify exactly where the line is between her human work and what she outsources to AI. Like, where does the design process begin with her and then where does it end? I never did get a response to that question. The seller simply refunded me without me asking and essentially disappeared. Now, perhaps that looks a little bit suspicious, but I do get it. If she had done any Googling or found the video I made tearing her specific listing apart, she may not be very motivated to speak to me about this. And with that, I kind of hit a dead end, and I was forced to begin looking for AI-generated patterns anew. The first pattern I investigated was a hat pattern. And so part of me was thinking, like, maybe this was too simple. Maybe the reason that everything looked really good and I couldn't tell where AI stopped and started is because the shape is just so straightforward. Maybe we need to look at something slightly more complicated. So I continued to comb through Etsy looking for these red flag AI listings, and I came upon this one for a simple top-down raglan sweater. I thought, this is a nice next step up in difficulty. Let's take a look. We have all of the same red flags from that hat pattern, but when I started reading through this pattern, something really strange happened. I got a feeling of deja vu. I had knit this pattern before. All right, before we go any deeper into this investigation, let's take a moment to say thank you to the sponsor of today's video, Quince. Today they sent me a complete outfit, and I do think it's perfect for this time of year. So give me a second, let me show you what it looks like. This is the washable stretch silk tiered maxi dress from Quince, and truly I feel like those videos where dogs are hearing all their favorite words, it's like silk, stretchy, washable. It does indeed have pockets. Quince also sent me this cotton cashmere cardigan, especially in that late summer, early autumn period. I feel like I need a little bit of a layer sometimes, but it's not quite cold enough for a hand knit sweater. This is like the perfect middle ground. To finish off the look, Quince sent me this trench coat. Just like I've come to expect with Quince, the quality of this is incredible. It has a nice weight to it. Throw a hand knit sweater under this. I feel like this takes you all the way into the winter. Quince partners directly with the manufacturer, so they can confirm that the factories are using safe, ethical, responsible practices, and because they're cutting out the middleman, they can pass along a cost savings to you. If you want to check out Quince, there's a link in my description, or you can scan the QR code on screen for free shipping and 365-day returns. Thank you again to Quince. Now let's get back to the investigation. I just had this feeling, I know this pattern. Now just to get this out of the way, yes, there are going to be certain similarities in every simple seamless top-down raglan. It's the same approach. So you're always going to be casting on your neck stitches, increasing down the yoke for 4 increase points. You're going to separate for the body and the sleeves. I'm not talking about that kind of similarity. This was too close for comfort, and I'll explain why I noticed it. The pattern this reminded me of was the Step-by-Step sweater by Florence Miller. It's a pretty iconic pattern. Her tutorial video has been viewed over 3 million times. Florence has held the hand of thousands of knitters making their first sweater. And it's an incredible tutorial. Part of the reason I knit it myself is because so many people recommend it as a great first sweater option, and I wanted to knit it too to feel really confident recommending it myself. But I do remember, and I'm a little embarrassed to admit this, but I will share it with you. I'm a teacher and I've taught a lot of people how to knit. Sometimes you see someone else teaching and you think, I don't know if I would have done it that way. Like, that's not my style. That's not how I do it. Doesn't mean their method is wrong. And I got that feeling with Florence's sweater because she offers 2 collar options. One is just a basic ribbed funnel neck. One is a fold over collar. I remember reading through her pattern and thinking, I don't know if I would have given that choice. Just because when I teach a beginner how to knit a sweater, usually my technique is to hold their hand through it. We're diving in the deep end. You are just going to follow each step. We can get funky with the second one, but for the first one, we're just trying to get a sweater on our needles, right? There's nothing wrong with Florence's approach. Clearly, millions of people love it. I'm just telling you this story because it helped me remember her pattern when I read this one from Etsy, and I noticed the exact same 2-collar option, a ribbed funnel neck, the fold over collar. It was the identical choice in the identical order, and that raised a red flag for me. Although a lot of raglans share a lot of elements, this choice isn't one of them. This is pretty unique to Florence's pattern. That was enough for me to take a PDF of Florence's step-by-step sweater and put it beside this Etsy listings PDF and start to compare them. What I found was really shocking. The cast-on counts are identical. The number of increased rounds per size, identical. The total number of stitches in the yoke is identical. The number of body stitches after you separate for sleeves is identical. I mean, in every size, this is like same all the way through. The body lengths, the ease, even like the method for choosing your size, the specific wording for how to choose your needle size, it's all exactly the same. And when this Etsy pattern recommends which yarn to use, it says pick a yarn similar in weight to Drops Nepal. Drops Nepal is the exact yarn that Florence used in her step-by-step sweater. Oh, and even though the Etsy listing did create its own title, the PDF contains this artifact where it still says step-by-step sweater. At this point, it's impossible to justify how this could possibly be a coincidence. It's obvious that the Etsy listing has plagiarized Florence's step-by-step sweater, which is particularly egregious because Florence's pattern is completely free and the Etsy listing is charging for this plagiarized pattern. One interesting thing to note is that the pattern isn't 100% plagiarized. They did redo the layout in the PDF, and they did add some things. They added some sizes to the pattern. The weird thing is, everywhere where the numbers are completely copied over from Florence's pattern, the numbers all work. But everywhere that the size range is expanded, the numbers don't work. Like the math is wrong, it doesn't make any sense. Like they ask you to cast on a certain number of stitches and then later to knit a different number of stitches. It's impossible, you didn't increase there. It's just a mess. Here's where I hit another dead end. Because as much as I, in my gut, suspect that someone fed Florence's pattern into AI and generated this from her numbers, I cannot prove it. All I can tell you is that if someone had taken Florence's PDF, fed it into AI, said, make it a little more size inclusive, change up the formatting, boom, this is pretty much exactly what would have been produced. Think about what it took for someone to catch this. I had to have knit Florence's step-by-step sweater. I had to have an extremely ridiculously specific memory about the 2 collars and my emotional reaction to those 2 collars so that I could remember it vibrantly enough to identify it in this pattern. And then I had to have access to both of those patterns using my skills garnered from time in the knitting publishing industry to compare these patterns side by side and notice the similarities. It took a lot for us to get here. I think that's what these Etsy listings are banking on. They're hoping that the same group of consumers who are buying like Ravelry patterns or using Florence's free step-by-step pattern are a completely different group of consumers than are buying patterns on Etsy. But I think another element that's allowed this Etsy shop to have success, to sell hundreds of patterns despite the fact that the listing is obviously AI generated, the pattern is plagiarized, and seems to me to be at least manipulated by AI, is the landscape of knitting patterns today. They say the best place to hide a leaf is in the forest. The best place to hide a plagiarized, simple, top-down, seamless raglan sweater is in a market that is flooded with simple top-down seamless raglan sweaters. In this case, it's a pretty small Etsy shop. They masked the pattern by reformatting the PDF, hiding it behind AI-generated images and some different description text. Although this is just one very specific scenario, I do feel genuinely that this is likely happening across the internet, a lot on Etsy for sure, when it is as simple as having this listing reported, taking it down, generating a new AI-generated listing image, throwing that PDF through ChatGPT and having it reformat the PDF and relisting it again in an hour's time for the same price. There's no consequences there. And they counted on nobody looking that closely, which sadly for them, I did. At this point, I realized that maybe I'd been looking for the wrong thing, or at least been looking in the wrong places, because I was trying to find AI-generated knitting patterns. And so far, I had found one very good hat pattern that I could not prove was made by AI, and one straight up plagiarized pattern that I couldn't prove had been touched by AI. At this point, I was feeling pretty frustrated, so I went ahead and posted on my Instagram story, and I basically asked, like, I'm desperate here. Has anybody seen AI-generated knitting patterns floating around? Do you know of one? Have you knit one? Send me a message, let me know, I'd love to hear about it. That story was viewed over 1,000 times, and I received 2 responses. The first one said, have you checked Etsy? They seem to be everywhere there. The second one said, check out TL Yarncraft's recent video on the subject, and linked me to it. I did watch that video. I highly recommend you watch it. Her investigation actually kind of reveals something similar to what I found with the Florence sweater, but in the inverse. I'll link it in the description so you can go and check it out. The thing that got me about this Instagram poll is I only got 2 responses. And even those 2 responses didn't point me directly to, like, here is a PDF of an AI generated knitting pattern. Like, I tried knitting this and it was AI, and I know it's AI and I can prove it, and here's the PDF. That feels kind of weird, right? Because the knitting community is so virulently anti-AI. Like, talking about it constantly. As soon as we see it, it's like shared and posted. It makes its way to Reddit. Like, everyone's talking about it. The knitting community is on the hunt for AI. And when I asked, does anybody know about AI generated knitting patterns? Can you direct me to one? Silence on the other line. At this point, I actually went back and reread an article that I loved that Kate Davies posted this past April called Knitting Bullshit. In it, I mean, you can feel her anger through the screen as you're reading. It's an excellent piece. I will link it for you to read down below. But Kate talks about all these different ways that AI is manifesting in the knitting world, taking advantage of our community, creating just slop to prey on the emotions and the passions of hobbyists. She mentions AI-generated videos, AI-generated podcasts, but there is no mention of AI-generated knitting patterns, specifically patterns, at all. Kate is one of the most respected voices in the knitting community, so I don't think that Kate had an oversight here. I think that Kate came up against the same dead end that I did. You can't talk about something that you can't find. You can't lambast something that doesn't seem to exist. Although I could find tons of AI-generated product listings and packaging, I could not find any clear, labeled, AI-generated knitting patterns. At this point, the fact that I couldn't locate an AI-generated knitting pattern stopped feeling like a failure of my investigation and started feeling like a data point. So, word of mouth, Instagram story, not enough to get me some AI-generated knitting patterns in hand. So I did return to Etsy, one last-ditch effort. I messaged a bunch of sellers who had this AI red flag packaging on their listings, the images, the descriptions. I said, hey, I'm working on a piece on AI generated knitting patterns. I noticed that you use AI to generate images for your listing. Would you mind talking to me about how you use AI as a tool in your process? I'm not trying to shut them down before they respond, right? I got a number of responses, and every seller had the same thing to say. They all adamantly denied using AI to generate their patterns. They would say, hey, no, I designed this, my mom designed this. We just use AI for some of the administrative stuff, the proofreading, layout, image generation. One seller said that English was not her first language, and so she uses AI to ensure that the pattern is like clear and has correct grammar in the English language, which she's not comfortable with. Not one seller would admit to using AI as a tool in knitwear design. At this point, we do have to take a step back and ask, like, what did I expect them to say? AI use is so hated in the knitting world that, I mean, they would be silly to admit to using, even if they are using it to design patterns. These Etsy sellers have likely seen the evisceration that happens to brands that admit to AI use. So I understand the hesitation to admit to using it. Out of all of the Etsy sellers who I reached out to, there was one who I wanted to hear back from the most. That was the person who listed the top-down seamless raglan. When I messaged her, I hadn't yet realized her pattern was linked to Florence. At this point, I was just asking about AI use in general. I never did get a response from her, so I just went ahead and put this video together. But after filming and as I was editing, I finally got a response. The seller told me that she does write her patterns herself. There's a little typo here, but I'm assuming she uses AI to assist her in arranging the text and making Photoshop designs sometimes to make the original images more clear. This response is almost identical to the responses I received from all of the other Etsy sellers, but this is the one case where I can finally prove that it isn't true. In this case, we know for a fact that this person did not write this pattern, as it is plagiarized from Florence, and the claim about Photoshop design is kind of interesting because these are clearly purely AI generated images. There is no original to make more clear. So even though I still can't prove that AI generated this pattern, I can prove that her claim, I write my patterns myself, that isn't true. And neither is the part about the images. And that changes how I receive all of the other Etsy sellers' answers.
because it doesn't mean that everyone is lying, but it does confirm that this claim, I designed it myself, I only used AI for the admin tasks, that's a default response, whether it is true or not. And at this point, I don't feel like I can take any of those responses at face value anymore.
But that was it. My last attempt to squeeze something out of Etsy and get some answers about how AI is being used today to generate knitting patterns. Every time I tried to push down an alleyway and find a solution or an answer, I was hitting a dead end and I wasn't really sure where to look next. At this point, I had to sit back and ask myself what I really was looking for here. This whole time, I think I had been picturing kind of a random figure outside the knitting community, sitting at their computer, typing in, computer, generate a knitting pattern, make it really good, enter, and then just uploading whatever comes out to Etsy. And I think this is a pitfall that many members of the knitting community fall into. When we picture a person who uses AI, we think of someone outside of our community. And a lot of the framing around AI anger is directed outward. A brand that is using AI must not really be for the knitters, they are outside of it, because that is something that a creative doesn't use. In some cases, I think the knitting community even disembodies AI. It just kind of is talked about as if it spawns spontaneously, but we all know that a person has to create the prompt to generate something through AI. And the more I thought about this, the more I realized that this dissociation of AI use in the knitting world was getting me nowhere. The suspicion started to build that the call is coming from inside the house. So here's my theory about what is actually happening with AI-generated knitting patterns. And again, it's just a theory, and it's the only thing that makes sense to me given everything I've learned so far. Think about a person who knits and identifies as part of the knitting community, has been knitting for at least a couple of projects. Eventually they get to a point where they want to improvise their own thing. They cast on, maybe they're using a familiar shape like a top-down raglan, and they're improvising, measuring it against their body, trying it on as they go. Eventually they finish this sweater, the first one that is off page. Maybe they're even sharing it online, and they're proud of it. Dang, I made this. This looks really good. Maybe even friends are hyping them up in the comments ooh, when's the pattern release? And they think, ooh, maybe I should sell this. But this person doesn't yet have the expertise, the years of experience that we associate with knitwear designers. They may be aware that they don't know yet how to design a knitting pattern. Riffing on a top-down raglan and fitting it to your body is a little different than releasing a pattern with instructions for others and grading it to multiple sizes. They turn to AI for the part they don't know how to do. They take the loose notes that they took as they were building this sweater and maybe some measurements of the finished piece. They input it all into an AI engine and they say, can you turn this into a finished pattern? Take these loose notes, clean it all up, create a graded version, double check the math, generate it into a PDF, go. The hard thing here is that the sweater itself is real. The person who made it is real. Their entire creative process leading up to that point was real. They may have even been sharing it along the way. There's real photos of a real sweater on a real body. But the pattern is AI generated, or at the very least AI assisted. Now, when you think about this workflow, everything kind of falls into place. Even the Etsy sellers who wouldn't admit to using AI for the design, because if they followed this model, at least in their head, they did design it, right? They knit the sweater. They just used AI to clean up all the numbers to make it into a pattern. Where is the line between human generated and AI generated? If AI graded 7 of the 8 sizes, if it wrote all of the instructions, if it took your loose notes and a photo and measurements of a garment and reverse engineered an entire pattern, what percentage of work affords the label AI generated? Now, if my theory is true, the reason it's so hard to find AI-generated patterns is because they no longer look like AI-generated patterns. They have real photos of real people wearing real garments, and those people have personas and personalities that you may follow online. You feel like you know them. It's hard to imagine that they are using AI even heavily as a tool in their design. This also helps explain why it was so hard to locate AI-generated patterns, because I was looking outside of the community. I was looking on Etsy. That's not always where people in the knitting community look for patterns. I'm not trying to call out aspiring designers who are just hoping to make it. I wasn't even looking at their patterns, but My suspicion is that that's the most likely place that we might find AI use. Anybody who's inside of this community is going to carefully mask their AI use so no one can ever trace it. Etsy sellers don't care because they're not catering to the same community, so the people who are buying Etsy patterns don't care that the photos are AI generated or they can't identify that they are. One other caveat is that the person I'm picturing is not an established experienced designer. Because if you are an established, experienced designer, you already know how to write a knitting pattern, you know how to grade sizes, it is a ton of work, it is professional work, but you already know how to do it. You've done it so many times that you have your workflow, you have your tech editor on speed dial, your graphic designer, the photographer you work with. It would make no sense for a respected, established designer to start leaning on AI as a tool in their workflow today, because it only stands to erode the trust in their work that they've built over so many years. So I'm not picturing someone established who knows what they're doing. I'm really picturing a newer creator, someone who learned how to knit fairly recently. They don't yet have the skill set to design a pattern, but they're very eager to release one, especially in an online landscape that seems to push design more and more. And so they lean on a tool that appears to be able to fill in the gap in their skill set. And honestly, I have a lot of empathy for this instinct. The way social media looks today, it can feel really tough to keep up. There's constantly posts and videos of everyone knitting super quickly, everything I knit in a day, in a week, in 12 hours. For a newer knitter, a newer creator, it can feel like you just have to rush to fill in your skill set. I also understand that times are tough. A lot of people are looking for ways to bring just a little bit of extra income in to make ends meet, and selling knitting patterns for a lot of people feels like a potential way to do that. And if that's you, you may not have the time to wait for your skill set to catch up to where it needs to be to release a good pattern. So you use the tool that's available to you to fill in that gap. That instinct does have a certain logic behind it, even if we don't endorse it. But for the same reason that they're using AI to try and monetize and sell patterns, they can never admit to using it because it would absolutely destroy their business. It makes sense to me, but it's still a theory. Editing Deborah here. I recorded this video last weekend, and between then and now, a very well-known, prominent, respected, established knitwear designer posted an Instagram story with a screenshot of her conversation with ChatGPT, where she input a knitting chart that she created and asked it to convert that chart into step-by-step instructions. ChatGPT didn't do very well with this, and the text on screen was kind of joking, like, oh, why can't I train ChatGPT to do my job yet? A lot of people did not like that, so the designer made another story apologizing, saying that the whole thing was a joke. She never, ever, ever uses AI, and that this was just an isolated incident or a joke. To be honest, the response to both her initial story and the later apology and correction was pretty intense. There were tons of negative comments in her own Instagram comment section, as well as threads on Reddit's Craft Snark. Now, what I find interesting is something very specific about this whole situation, because this designer is drawing a very specific line. She created the chart, she designed it, AI is just converting it into a slightly different presentation. That's not generating a pattern, that's just a little bit of extra help. This immediately made me think of the Etsy designers who adamantly denied using AI to generate their patterns. They said they used it for image generation and proofreading and a bunch of other administrative work, but the pattern themselves, the design, is theirs. Now, just to be clear, I did prove that one of the Etsy designers was actually plagiarizing their pattern. I am not suggesting the same for this established designer. I don't think these situations are perfectly equivalent, but I do think that they're a helpful way to see the way that different people are drawing a boundary between human and AI work. The Etsy designer says, I created the pattern, AI just proofread it. This established knitwear designer who had an incident this week says, I designed the chart, AI is just converting or attempting to convert it into written step-by-step instructions. The hypothetical newer designer who I just described a moment ago might say, I created the sweater, AI is just helping me turn my loose notes into an actual pattern. Everybody is drawing the line in a different place, but each person feels confident that they are still the designer of the pattern and that AI is just assisting them with a little bit of the work, but that they, the human, still own this creative process. The other reason I had to mention this story is because just a moment ago you heard me explain that an experienced knitwear designer would never use AI in their workflow because they already know what they're doing and the reputational risk is far too great to dabble in AI. I was wrong about that. Well, I was right that the reputational risk is way too great, and this week's incident is the perfect example of that. And that may change my argument. Maybe AI isn't just about newer designers who don't have the skill set to create patterns yet. Maybe it's also about experienced designers who are trying to expedite their workflow. After she posted her apology, this established knitwear designer posted another Instagram story. And I think that this is almost more interesting than all of the events that preceded it. She says, "To my fellow designers and creators in the industry, I know how scary it can feel to see this happen to a colleague. I've been there. Don't fear." What an interesting thing to say in that moment. She's speaking directly to other designers, which means that other designers are probably watching this and something is coming up for them. Now, maybe she just means it's scary to see the internet mob coming for a colleague, which is true. It's intense. It's scary to see happening. That interpretation could be a completely fair take. But to be honest, my instinct when I first read it was to think she was speaking to other designers about AI use. It felt like she was saying, without saying, I know we're all using AI, and it's scary to see someone get caught or even called out on using it, and fellow designers might be feeling scared and wondering when they're going to get caught too. Just days prior to this post, Claude made an announcement that they were inserting watermarking into their texts moving forward, which could be on the forefront of the mind of people using AI in secret.
But crucially, the watermark won't tell you that AI wrote something. It'll only tell you that the text passed through Claude. So the designer who runs a finished pattern through for a grammar check is going to get the same watermark as a person who had the entire thing generated for them. Even the detection tool can't tell you where the line is.
If you were another designer watching this whole thing play out, it's probably true that you were reevaluating your thoughts and your process on using AI. You just watched another designer get publicly eviscerated for a public admission of AI use. Wherever you personally or ethically draw the line on AI use, this situation just taught you an important lesson about the cost of disclosure. Let's look in one more place for AI-generated patterns, and it's the one place that I can be guaranteed that I will find them. So let's take a look at the AI companies themselves. Feels like the only people who are willing to admit that they are using AI to generate knitting patterns are the people trying to sell you a product that generates AI knitting patterns. I wound up taking a look at Pearl Jam, which is a site that says you can type in a description of any garment and it will generate a pattern for you. Luckily, it already has a couple of examples on the site, so you can take a look at what their AI generated knitting patterns look like in full without having to generate any. So that's where I started. And here it is. It looks like a pretty solid knitting pattern. It has all of the steps in all of the right order that you would expect to see in a regular knitting pattern. One interesting thing is that Pearl Jam does preserve these artifacts where it shows you it's doing its math, it's checking its numbers, it gets the numbers wrong, it fixes the math. So you can kind of see the thought process behind the AI that's building this pattern. But even when I'm looking at a Pearl Jam pattern, I can't get this note out of my head. On the bottom of the website, it sticks with every page. It says that Pearl Jam is AI-generated patterns built on templates made by expert knitters. So what exactly does that mean? Where is the line between the template and the AI? How much of this is human? 2 years ago, AI-generated knitting patterns were a joke, shapes that defied physics. But Pearl Jam is creating patterns that really look like patterns, where you can knit them and come up with something that looks pretty close to the garment you were promised. AI-generated patterns aren't really a joke anymore. Are these patterns good? I don't know that I can endorse them as good. I have a hard time believing that an entity that has never held yarn and needles could generate a good knitting pattern. And to be fair, a metric that I value in knitting patterns is innovation, trying something new, delighting me with a technique or an approach or a skill I've never tried before, and making me say, wow, I learned something new knitting this project today, even after years of knitting. And I do not believe that an AI generator can ever achieve that kind of innovation because, by definition, AI is being fed lots of knitting patterns and it's spitting out and regurgitating the average of everything it's been fed. So it cannot really delight me with something new. It's just producing an average. But the reason why Pearl Jam is helpful to look at is because it helps us understand what AI patterns actually look like today. And they don't look like the slop that was being produced a couple of years ago anymore. They look a lot like everything else that's out there. And this is the version that admits it's AI. So if we're looking at the hundreds of patterns that are being churned out every single day by people trying to keep up and monetize their hobby, we have to wonder if this is what an openly AI website produces, how well can a person with a following who shows their face and tries on a physical garment mask AI language in a pattern that they are presenting as their own? So let's go back to the question that started this whole video. Where did all the AI knitting patterns go? Well, I have two theories as to why that has happened, and I think they're probably both true. The first is just that AI isn't really that funny anymore. The patterns that AI produces are no longer gibberish. No, they're not as good as what Elizabeth Zimmerman or Isola Teague could put out, but they are patterns that will produce a garment. They are good enough that you can follow instructions for a hat or a raglan or a blanket, and you will get something that looks like that shape and not a really weird pot holder that's full of holes and maybe has a tail. The reason that AI-generated patterns were such a joke is because they had a punchline. You could create a physical thing that looked crazy and show it, like, look how bad this is. But today, we can't really do that as easily. I also think AI is just less funny because we are more aware of the consequences of its use. With data centers being spread across the country, water being consumed at alarming rates, people are concerned about the growth of AI, and because of that, using it for a silly stunt with your knitting feels a little bit more heavy than it used to be. Now, my second theory is one that I already told you. If people within the knitting community are using AI for their patterns, they are never going to admit that. Because if you admit within the knitting world that you are using AI, you will lose all of your credibility and your ability to monetize. And the thing is, that stigma doesn't stop anybody from using AI. It just stops them from using it visibly. If you're generating AI images for your Instagram or for your Etsy listing, or you're making a LinkedIn post about how your brand loves AI, those are things that are going to get you caught. People are going to be upset about that. But if you are using AI to generate part or all of a knitting pattern and then posting the PDF with your human face and a photo of a real garment attached, people aren't necessarily going to call you out on it. The AI use that survives the current anger of the knitting internet is invisible AI use. Anti-AI discourse has not stopped people from using AI. It has just pushed a message that if you're going to use AI, you better not get caught. So where are all the AI knitting patterns? Honestly, I don't know. I don't think anybody knows. Because if my suspicion is correct, AI knitting patterns don't look like AI knitting patterns anymore. They look like patterns. They look like a photo of a real garment worn by a real person shared on social media, and then a real PDF with no indication that AI was used in any part of the process. I don't think we're going to see a flood of AI patterns coming because we'll never see it. It's just going to look like more and more inexperienced knitwear designers publishing their first pattern, proudly sharing their PDF. Before, it would take years or decades to build the experience level to be able to release a knitwear design. But today, people are able to skip the learning process, get your first or second knitting project under your belt, and suddenly release a nicely laid out, carefully edited knitting pattern with very little experience and the secret help of AI. Somewhere over the course of making this video, the question I'm asking started to change because I no longer wonder where the AI knitting patterns are. I think I figured out where they're hiding. Now I'm wondering, who is selling knitting patterns? Because in a world where you no longer need decades of experience in order to call yourself a designer and release a pattern, what does it even mean to be a knitwear designer anymore? That's the topic of the next video. If you don't want to miss the next part of the conversation, you can make sure to subscribe. And if you want to stay in touch between videos, you can follow me on Instagram or TikTok. If you want to support the probably unreasonable amount of time I spend buying suspicious knitting patterns off of Etsy, you can support the channel on Patreon as well. The link is in the description. As always, it's been so much fun to talk about knitting with you today, and I can't wait to see you in the next one. Bye.